If you've been watching Up North at 4, you know that we've had this How We Got Here series, and it's changed over the past few months. I used to be doing it through computer screens. Now we're actually going to museums. Today we are in the Langlade County Historical Museum, and it's also changed with the times. There's been a recent renovation that has totally redone the look of the interior of the museum. But we got to start on the outside of the museum because the building where the museum is located has some history just by itself. Okay, I'm right in front of the Langlade County Historical Museum with the Society's president, Joe Hermolin. Joe, it's good to meet you in person.
Yes, we've met online before, and it's great to see you in person.
And you know, I always enjoy meeting a fellow skier.
Yes.
Joe has done 28 Birkebeiners, people,
yeah,
so good for you.
I've been struggling always at the back of the pack, but I've enjoyed them all.
Just matters that you finish.
Yeah.
But let's talk about why we're here, Joe. And what's really special about this museum is the history of just the building behind it. So tell us about that building.
It was built as a Carnegie library. It has a couple of claims to fame, I guess. It was built in 1905, funded by Carnegie, who funded many libraries actually throughout the world, many in the US. And the architect was a well-known architect in Madison, Wisconsin, the first professor of civil engineering when the university was formed. He designed this late in his career. Alan Conover was his name. And as I said, it opened in 1905. The second floor served various different purposes. It was a teacher's training school for a while. It even housed the Historical Society Museum for a while. And then the museum itself, the Historical Society, which existed since the 1920s, it moved around from various storefronts in town until 1997, when the city built a new library and the Historical Society decided they could take over this building, the entire building, and maintain it and run it as a museum. And they've been doing it. A group has been doing it since 1997. It's been a constant battle to repair it and to maintain it, but it's all been working very well. And we had the plan for many years to make it ADA compliant, handicapped accessible, and we finally, in this past year and a half, got going, and we built this new wing that's on this end of the building, which has an elevator, restrooms, and it's a really beautiful addition, I think, to the original building. The building itself is on the National Register of Historic Places.
Well, congratulations for the addition on the side.
Yeah, well, we're very pleased. There are a lot of people who did a lot of work on this, and fundraising especially.
Definitely. Well, while we're out here, Joe, I think we have to mention what's actually behind me right now.
Yes.
Tell me about this wooden building over here.
This log cabin was the first house in what would eventually become Antigo. It was built in 1877 by Francis de la Glise and some of his friends who constructed this cabin. He moved his family here from Appleton. He had fought in the Civil War, came back to Appleton. He was a surveyor and then and a timber cruiser. And he brought his family here. It's a small cabin. It's amazing to look at now, to think that he had his wife and 6 children moved into this house. This wasn't its original location. It stood a few blocks up the street on the banks of Spring Brook, which was the river that ran through here. That was their plumbing source. And in 1916, the cabin, by then vacated, was in the way of the building up of downtown. So the city decided to move it down here to the grounds of what was at that time the library. And people at the Wisconsin Historical Society have told me they think this is the first example of a community making an effort to preserve its history, the first in Wisconsin. And it's been moved around a little bit on the grounds here. It's been restored, and it's a big hit, especially with school groups, school kids who come here on tours. The cabin is one of the highlights.
So not only does Antigo have rich history, it has a rich history of preserving its history.
Yes, it does.
That
exactly.
is really neat. Well,
yeah.
thank you for carrying on that tradition,
Okay.
Joe.
Well, I'm just part of a long tradition.
Okay,
having
I know.
fun.
Well, I'm glad you're having fun. We're going to keep having fun on the show. Next time, we're going to stay outside of the museum. We're going to check out the train over there. We'll be right back. We're back on Up North at 4, continuing our tour of the Langlade County Historical Museum. Still here with Joe Hermolin. Joe, we got an impressive piece of history. Tell us about
this. This steam locomotive commemorates the role that the railroad played in Antigo's history. Antigo is kind of in the middle of nowhere. In the late 1800s, most of the traffic was along rivers, and there is a small river that runs through Antigo, but it wasn't significant enough for log drives and things like that. But when the railroad came in the 1880s, then Antigo took off. It was only a little cluster of homes at the time, but because you could ship goods in, people could come in and out by rail, then the city took off. The Chicago Northwestern, which eventually established itself here, buying out the Milwaukee, Lakeshore, and Western Railroad, which first came through here. And they made Antigo in around 1900, 1905. They made it the railroad hub for northern Wisconsin, for the Ashland Division, it was called. So that means this is, if you were coming from Milwaukee to Ashland, to the Michigan Upper Peninsula, to Minneapolis, here's where you change trains. Here's where they brought their locomotives for repairs. There was a huge ice house here where they stored ice from the lake just around the corner there. And so every air-conditioned car or refrigerated freight car for produce that ran through northern Wisconsin was refrigerated using ice from Antigo and stored in the Antigo ice house. So in the days of diesel, from about 1900 to the 1950s, the railroad was a major employer in Antigo. And I would say the majority of families living here had a family member working for the railroad. It was just such a predominant part. So the importance of the railroad began to decline in the 1950s as diesel was replacing steam locomotives. And now there's nothing really left of what used to be a major railroad hub, except for the depot, which has now been repurposed for apartments and commercial buildings, but it's still there. That's the only building left out of about 10 city blocks worth of buildings related to the railroad. And I think it was about 12 years ago, we bought a locomotive and restored it. It was quite a wreck at the time, as a sort of commemoration of the role that the railroad had in Antigo's history. And again, as with the cabin, this is a big hit with school kids who come here on field trips and visitors to Antigo. I'm surprised at how many kids, 8, 9-year-old kids, who probably have never even ridden on a railroad, are fascinated by this link to the past.
Well, I can understand, Joe, and it looks like you have steps so people can actually
go
inside, which is really neat.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Joe.
Okay.
We're going to head inside the Langlade County Historical Museum next time in the show. We'll see you right after the break. We're back on Up North at 4, continuing our tour of the Langlade County Historical Museum. Still here with Joe Hermolin. Joe, before we get to the main topic for the day, man, this place is beautiful, and it's a lot more beautiful than it was maybe a couple years ago. So
Yes.
Tell me about that process.
Yeah, well, this was phase 2 of our renovation project, which has been going on now for over a year. And in here, what we've done is we've replaced the ceiling, which was acoustic tiles. Half of them were coming loose. And we've replaced the lighting, which makes this place look a lot livelier. And the lighting is much more appropriate for showing the displays that we have here in the museum. This is the main floor. We have an upstairs and a downstairs. They're still a bit of a work in progress, so we can't really tour that yet. But the main part of the museum is this floor, and we're really quite pleased with the way things turned out.
Yeah, like I said earlier, definitely impressive how far this place has come. Let's talk about what we're really standing in the midst of is an impressive collection of Native American history. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, we have quite a collection of beadwork, and this was all due to one person who collected a lot of this and donated it to the museum. And we've written about it, we've done presentations, we sometimes lent some of this material out to other museums, but in my opinion, it's one of our prize items in our collection. We have, I think, 4 bandolier bags here, they would take about a year to produce. These are glass beads that are sewn onto fabric, and they were worn on ceremonial occasions. And then we have a number of other items, decorated moccasins, belts that were used in ceremonial occasions. And that, to me, is one of the prized things we have in this museum.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Joe. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to talk about moonshining, so stay tuned for that. We'll be right back. We are back on Up North at 4, continuing our tour of the Langlade County Historical Museum. Still here with Joe Hermolin. Joe, tell me everything. Let's talk about moonshining in the Anago area. Can you start from the beginning? Well,
this is, again, it's a long story, and I don't know all of it, but during Prohibition, this area, rural Langlade County, was a well-known moonshining area. There were some rural towns where I guess it was the main industry. Prohibition came in, I think, 1919. Yes, 1919. And at the time, there were 2 breweries in Antigo. They quickly went out of business. But it didn't take long for people to make up for it with this moonshine. And so we have a number of items of memorabilia left over from the moonshine era, like these stills, and some photographs up on the wall here. And I really can't tell you too much more about, these people obviously didn't publicize too much about what they were doing, but I know one big location was the town of Ormsby, was a major moonshining focus in this area. So right behind this moonshine display, we have some logging displays. Tell me a little bit about that. Well, I think this is fairly typical of northern Wisconsin, is that it was logging in the years after the Civil War that attracted people here. Well, I should say white men settlers. There were Native Americans here long before that. But it was the logging industry that brought people to this area, and it was also a major industry in Langlade County. In fact, it still is. Forest products are a major part of the economy. I'd like to show one item. Logs were cut, this is before the railroad, logs were cut in the winter, taken down to the river's edge. This is mostly in the eastern part of the county near the Wolf River. And in the spring, they would start log drives. And each little lumber company, they had their own sort of stamp hammer. Logs were marked just like branding irons. And then when they were floated downriver to the mills, then you could sort out who was the owner of which log and who would get paid for the logs. There were also some stories about people sawing off the part of the that had the brand and then rebranding it with their own. So there was a little bit of skullduggery going on in that too. But here is one example of I call it a branding iron, but it was a stamp that you would put on logs before floating them downstream.
Okay, I had seen some of those at the Merrill History Museum,
Oh, yeah.
so it's interesting to see this one as well.
There's an amazing collection at the Menominee, I think it's in Kashina Logging Museum. They have a big collection of these.
Okay, thank you again, Joe. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to talk about a device that I had never seen before. Maybe people Joe's age know a little bit more about it, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll be right back. Okay, it's our final day of the tour here at the Langlade County Historical Museum. Still here with Joe Hermolin. Joe, I really had no even idea what this might be. So tell us about this piece of equipment.
Yes. Well, I'd like to preface it by saying that I can divide people into two main groups that come into the museum. One group looks at this and just looks and says, oh, I remember those things. And the other group looks at these things, this thing, and says, what is that? And this came from a shoe store in Antigo, but they were all over, including the city that I grew up in. And it's an X-ray machine for children to check out how the shoe fits. So a child would buy a pair of shoes or try on a pair of shoes and would stand on this thing, and your feet would go in here, and there was an X-ray, it's gone now, an X-ray source in there, and you could look through here and see how the toes fit in the shoe. And there were viewing ports for a parent and the shoe salesman and the child trying on the shoe. And that's how you decided whether the shoe was a good fit or not. And just a personal recollection, my little brother and I, when we were taken to buy new shoes, we would fight over this thing in our shoe store and say, it's my turn to look, it's my turn to look. And the thought that all these X-rays were possibly harmful never crossed our minds, never crossed our parents' minds, never crossed the shoe salesman's mind either, I'm sure.
I'm guessing that's probably why they stopped using it, right?
Yeah, oh yes, finally the word got out that these things were not that safe. But in the 1950s, early 50s, this was a great amusement.
Well, Joe, if people want to see this for themselves and see the whole museum, what hours are you guys open?
Yes, well, in the summertime, we're open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 till 4. In the winter, after October 1st, we cut back and we're only open Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 10 till 4. And we're always available for special tours, school groups, or any other group can make special arrangements by calling the museum, or you can get a contact from our web page, langladehistory.com, and we do arrange private groups too.
Joe, thanks so much for all your work here at the museum. Thank you so much for the tour as well. It's really been great, and I've learned so much. So again, thank you.
Okay, well, and thanks for the opportunity, and I hope to see people coming in, and I'd be glad to talk, and so would the other volunteers here, be glad to talk about the things we have.
Because if you know Joe, you know he's a talker. He has much more to say about history. This is just scratching the surface, per usual. Thanks again, Joe. We'll be right back.